Um, Again, hello and welcome everybody to the Visiting Filmmaker series online. The film visiting film hi, I need more coffee. The Visiting Filmmaker series is curated by Associate Program Director Cynthia Fuchs, and it has brought films and artists to the Mason campus for 20 years. Now, in this moment that we're in, its new incarnation is online, which I think has been really fun, and I've been really excited to participate. The Visiting Filmmakers series is sponsored by Film and Video Studies, Chess, CBPA, the English Department, the School of Art, Global Affairs and Global Programs, CBPA's Christos series, Arts in Context, University Libraries, Film and Media Studies, the Interdisciplinary Curriculum Committee, History and Art History, University Life, and Women and Gender Studies. Woo! My name is Lisa Thrasher. Some of you know me as Professor Thrasher. Some of you call me Thrasher, LT, but we can call me Lisa today. And our guest is Rick Dunkle, who is a TV writer and producer, among many other millions of things. And I would also like to say that Rick went to film school with Professor Amanda Krause. Wave, Amanda. Hi. And so I'm so glad Amanda's here too, because I welcome Amanda to jump in and ask a question, share anecdotes, however it goes. So initially, I kind of try to structure these things in a little bit of a, with a story arc for the overall discussion. However, I've noticed so far that they tend to just be a little bit more free association, and it's been just really fun and really wonderful. So I'll pose some big questions, but I'd love to hear questions from the students as well. So Rick Dunkle is a television writer and producer best known for his work on the hit CBS franchise Criminal Minds and the new drama series on Fox, Deputy. With nearly 20 years working in the entertainment industry, Rick began his career as an intern at Paramount Pictures and then as an assistant at Sony Pictures Entertainment. Rick's Hollywood experience runs the gamut from network programming to ratings research, marketing, and international development. Rick earned his BA in cinema and television production from Columbia College, Hollywood, and an MFA in screenwriting from Loyola Marymount University. He has taught courses in entertainment and cross promotion at Emerson College. Remind us, Cynthia, we should talk to him later. Digital storytelling at University of Indianapolis, and psychology and film at Columbia College, Hollywood. This fall, we're launching a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing and producing content to benefit charities and people in need. Rick is repped by Rob Kim at Buchwald. We can also get into a little bit of that Writers Guild agent stuff, which I'm so fascinated about. I presume that's your manager? No? Or
agent. I have an agent. They're one of the ones that signed the code of conduct.
oh, wow, bravo. That's great. So, Rick, thank you so much. We're so excited you're here. I know it's a little on the early side for LA. Um, and I really kind of first wanted to start off by saying, what on earth is a TV producer and how might that differ from the way that a film producer might function? And then we'll go more into writing.
Sure. I think the first important information about that would be that there are multiple kinds of TV producers. There's what I am as a writer producer, which is very different from a TV line producer, a TV directing producer. Line producer primarily is studio that's funding the project, and they're very much focused on the money and the logistics of making sure that not only are we coming within budget, but that we're able to shoot what we're trying to shoot. And the directing producer, to sum it up, would be the overall visual look of the show. You know, most shows, say it's a standard 13 or 22 episode season, you're going to have anywhere from, for a 13 episode season, you may have 8 or 9, maybe even 10 different directors that come in and shoot each of those episodes. So the directing producer becomes integral in a situation like that, because they are responsible for making sure that even if you've got a director whose background is something on the CW and someone who's primarily worked, you know, on streaming, that visually ends up looking and feeling very much like the product that you're creating, most recently for Fox. So they become very important to working with. The ability to, directors typically come onto a show with only 7 days for prep, 8 days for shooting an episode. So the directing producer has an opportunity to know what stories are coming well in advance of that director's joining the show. So they're able to think in advance about what locations they might want to take the directors to look at when they come. You know, that especially with Deputy having shot in New Mexico, you know, a lot of those directors were in New Mexico shooting for the first time. So they may not be as familiar with the location opportunities. Having said all that about the other kinds of producers, a writer producer is very much responsible for the arc of the season, down to making sure that the scripts that are being delivered to production are able to be shot. You know, they're the they're the ones that deal very much with the studio, getting notes on the content of the character development, anywhere from, you know, down to, in television more so than film, I would say that the writer director, or writer producer rather, is responsible for the overall flow of that show. In film, very much you'll hire a writer, you'll take their draft, you'll maybe hire 6 or 7 other writers at some point to do rewrites on those drafts. And in television, it's more that the writers are the ones developing the arc of a season, the arc of a series, and very much my experience, as was kind of mentioned in my bio, you know, 2 very different television shows that I've worked on. You know, in Criminal Minds is what we call more of a procedural show, where each episode was kind of standalone. Yes, you can have a character arc that's mapped out over the course of a few episodes, or even just character development over the years. I mean, that's a show that went on for 15 years. Whereas Deputy was very different, because the stories, despite having like a crime that we would solve each week, because they were sheriff's deputies and that's their job, very much 50% of that show was what are their personal lives and how are they evolving over the course of the season. And that's such a different process than the world of Criminal Minds, where you had a standalone episode and you really, most of the focus was on what was that crime, and maybe you had a couple beats to plug into a character and figure out where they are emotionally and how they're coping with what they're dealing with. So much of that's about the solving, whereas on Deputy, it was very much, you know, you're starting knowing that you've got a character who is trying to adopt kids, and you know that a couple episodes later they're going to have a family member who's actually related to those kids coming in and kind of messing up the process, and, you know, at the end actually get custody. And so you have to kind of plot that throughout your season to figure out when are the best moments to show each of those moments in a character's life. And, you know, that can be it's a debate that happens very much between not just the writer's room and the producers, but also the studio and the network and the actors. And what feels natural. We had a character on Deputy who is held hostage, and there was huge discussions on what's the emotional impact of that, and are we able to resolve what she's dealt with in one episode, or is that something that we need to carry on and hit a couple times before the season is over? And those are kind of the debates that you're having in a writer's room, writer's office. But also the major difference, and for any aspiring writers out there, I always say, like, don't be precious with your work either, because it's many times the hospital episode is a perfect example. When we first uh, entertained the idea of doing that episode, it was going to be what's called a bottle show, which is an episode where you're trying to do it on your own sets, and because you're trying to save money. It's the midpoint of the season, and you want to hold some back for the finale. So you try and
I call it a bottle show. What does that mean? What is that referring to?
as self-contained as possible. You're trying to most shows have your standing sets, like Criminal Minds was pattern is basically how you budget a show. Like, every show is going to be different, and you have to roll with the punches with the director and what they think is important, what the writer thinks is important, and bringing that all together. And pattern is your basic idea of what elements you can have in a show that will allow it to come out to budget. And for Deputy, it was, you could have one kind of medium action sequence, which involves stunts, car chase, something like that. Those are always going to be a little pricier because you might be crashing into things, you might be making a car explode or get shot up a lot. And then you can have maybe one big explosive end of episode piece, but that's really it. And within that, then you're hoping with Deputy, we had standing sets that were our Hall of Justice, were our local PD. So for a bottle, and typically then you'd have maybe the same days, episode of television shot in about 8 days. So you would have typically 4 days that you're on your main sets, which is where we had at Criminal Minds. That's where the behavioral analysis unit was. That's where Garcia's office was. That's where the jet was. On Deputy, it was very much that's where the Hall of Justice is, the local police station, a couple of the homes. So for a bottle episode, what you're trying to do is not go out on location. You're trying to shoot that as much on the stages that you've already built, because then you're saving costs on location fees, you're saving costs on having to build new sets. And we had a hospital set on Deputy because one of our main characters was a doctor. So when we first started with the idea of there being a hostage situation at a hospital, it was very much, how can we redress the set that we have to kind of become a hospital that there's a hostage situation at? And, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, our locations department found a just absolutely phenomenal location for a prison hospital set opportunity. So we kind of, rather than it being in Los Angeles, USC Medical actually does a majority of hospital surgeries, that kind of thing. So we were going to kind of base it in the vein of, it's at a real hospital, we can redress our stats. Locations comes back, says, hey, but look at this one with all the like bulky doors and all the security. And we're like, oh my God, well, obviously that's where we want to do it. So that's an example of, on the fly, you're changing it to fit a really cool location. You can still have the hostage situation. But as a result, I mean, that episode, I want to say, ended up being 6 days on location and 2 days on set, which is very much not a bottle episode. And so then we kind of kicked the money savings down the line, and we're very much aware of, okay, well, we're going to have to save that at some point. But the episode turned out, really well. because we had such, number one, a phenomenal director, number two, a great directing producer, and just an amazing location that fit that space and story so well.
That's great. That's so interesting. And of course, the producer in me is thinking like, oh, I would love that challenge to make a non-bottle episode on a bottle episode budget. Like, I can do it. How can I do it? That sounds like a challenge I'd be excited to take on.
It's, I mean, I want to say that's one of the, the interesting things with a show that like Deputy, where it shot 800 miles away from where office was that, we would think, oh, we're saving money by trimming down the guest cast of what we're gonna need, and then production has found either a great actor or they found you. It's all about the pieces that you're kind of weaving in together, because what we think might be savings, production's like, no, 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 we can spend that money. What we really need you to do is get rid of this entire storyline, and that's where it becomes super important for everyone to be communicating, because because as far ahead as you can get on those things, then you're not prepping last minute. And it's very helpful to have a line producer and a directing producer that you have open dialogue with, that you're able to identify right away what are going to be those most expensive things, because as a writer, then it's your job to figure out, okay, well, I know what story I'm telling, how can I adjust that so that we are coming in under budget, hopefully, and fitting to a cheaper location that maybe wasn't how your story originally was pitched.
So I think it might be a good time now to talk about the difference of approach as a writer on a procedural or episodic type show versus a serial type show. And also when you're conceiving the show from the beginning, since Deputy is in its first season or just finished its first season, you probably were really able to be in there and kind of figure out some of the characters and how to roll it out. But it seems to me like there's one, I mean, there's many, but one big distinction is the level of commitment that you need your audience to have, or compassion that your audience needs to form with the main characters. Where an episodic, it can be a little bit more arm's distance, and they can consume the show in a way that they understand the structure, they know how it's going to work, they can get up, go get another slice of pizza and come back, and they're still there with your characters. Where a serialized uh, show, we need to love those people.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. There, with Deputy, perfect example, I would say. We told the story of a character who was coming out as non-binary, and originally, I mean, that had always been part of the showrunner Kim Harrison's pitch for the first season, was that this was going to happen. That came out of the actor themselves being non-binary, and originally the character had been written as being lesbian, and we wanted to change that to be more true to the actor playing the character. So that came in terms of what you're talking about with story and getting people to really tie into the characters, was we knew that a lot of people would have questions like, what is non-binary? I mean, it's so a story arc like that you can't just do in a moment, because you've got people who need to relate to that character, but also understand something that they may not have understanding about. So even as writers, we very much that was heavy consulting with GLAAD to even approach that story in an appropriate fashion, that we were able to tell it really. I mean, the first
I have to say, when I was prepping for this, you gave me the 2 episodes, which I sent out to my students. I see some students here, but students from other classes too. And so instead of just watching the episode that you wrote on Deputy, I wanted to watch the pilot first because I wanted to see the structure, what's our goal, where are we going with this? I needed to see it there so I could understand your episode in context. And when that character, whose name I don't recall, I'm so sorry, came to the house to pick him up, and the wife and the daughter called them she, I cringed. And I was like, oh my God, someone needs to talk to them. So I of course, you guys had prepared and everything, but that was like in the first, what, 10 minutes of the show?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was, there was a different showrunner when Deputy began, and when the original showrunner parted ways and Kim Harrison was brought in to run the show, it was very much, that was part of her original pitch. She had met the actor and Bex, and they had discussed like how is a better way to tell this story. And I think that, we wanted to stick to the realism of it. I mean, that's why you have the character of Genevieve, where, it was interesting because you have this, not only is it the pronouns that you have to learn, which I think we had an amazing scene between Bishop and uh, where, you know, Bill admits, like, I may not always get it right. And I think that speaks to a lot of viewers and a lot of people that maybe don't understand that experience. And we wanted to say, like, hey, like, you may not get it, and we're going to help you along the way to figure that out, because that's part of the character evolution. I mean, this is a character who was dealing with people that didn't understand their journey and who was trying to understand their journey to begin with. And and in consulting with GLAAD, I mean, it was amazing to hear how, I mean, the relationship between Bishop and Genevieve doesn't work out. And and people have asked about that. It was Genevieve was a lesbian and Bishop was non-binary, but physically, if they're both women, why was that problem? And it all comes down to identity, and we got to play that in a very real manner, so that people could witness that. And that was something. I mean, I think we ended up playing that out over 4 or 5 episodes. It was originally pitched as, I mean, obviously with a serialized aspect, you're gonna play that out over multiple opportunities. But it was so wonderful to have the moment then, a couple episodes later after they came out, where Cade just says to Bishop, they, them, I got you. Like, it was just so simple and easy for that moment. And, that's an example of, so then from that point forward, we just made sure that anytime you identify them as Bishop, or you identify them with their proper pronouns, and that was it. You didn't have to hit it as hard after that, after you've done the explanation, because then you learn about it through the experiences of Bishop. And I mean, Bishop had many journeys. Bishop had the coming out journey, and then Bishop had the, finding their place in the department journey as well. And that was another thing where, when you're plotting out the season, it's okay, are we too heavy on the personal here, but we know we have to do this arc professionally as well? How do we stretch that out so that it's not just boom, 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 all of this is happening, and you're kind of, as an audience member, having whiplash because you don't know what story element you're supposed to be following. And that's, I would say, the biggest difference between serial and procedural, because in serial, you're very much thinking about where the character is going and how you stretch that out in a way that it's not too much at once, and that it's coming more of a natural aspect. Whereas on a procedural show, you may have 7 main characters and you've got maybe 2 beats per episode to address the personal component of just one of those characters. So their evolution is strung out much longer because on a show like Criminal Minds, the actors used to joke about the fact that the people that got to come in and be the unsubs had the more had the more exciting things to do because you're seeing a full arc from them in one episode, whereas so much of what our heroes are doing is solving those crimes, and you may not get to touch on their personal life for another few episodes after. And I think even Deputy, even though we saw the slow evolutions, each character got to have, like, you knew this was a Bishop episode, or you knew that this was a Minnick episode, and you get to have more in terms of character with Serialized, but also I would say you can't get too far ahead with Serial either, because very much if you're doing an episode and you realize, okay, this was going to be the opportunity. If you're mapping out an episode in advance and you're thinking, okay, this is going to be the coming out journey, but we actually moved the coming out journey up several episodes. So then it was you're rereading those earlier episodes on the fly as they're prepping, because you've realized, no, now we need to touch base on the coming out story in this episode, which shoots in a day or on the weekend. So you're very much moving pieces. I think that when we really got into our rhythm on that, it was very much you just think of all of those main story points as being able to we had them in a grid on a spreadsheet, and if you had to move it, you just move it down and you figure out, okay, so what bridges that gap? If we need more information, so here's where we're going to plot it in. And I would say that that's the major difference, because on Criminal Minds, it was very much, okay, this is a story about a bomber. At the end of the episode, we're going to have solved the case, and the bomber situation is going to be resolved. And yes, it's going to land on one of our characters emotionally, and that will be something that we can see and play later down the line. But for the most part, their story will be told in two beats, and most of it will be focused on the crime, the victims, and solving the crime.
So if we were to kind of break it down, let's start maybe with procedural, and we're talking one episode, for example. Do you kind of have an idea in your head, or is it something that is out there on the table that everybody follows? Like, we need 5 minutes of, or 15 minutes of our main characters, and then the rest is this. Do you have kind of a math breakdown for that?
Mathematically, I would say we do it by beats, not necessarily minutes. So another thing is television's evolving, programming's evolving. And when Criminal Minds was first devised, it was a 4-act with a teaser structure. And Deputy is a 6-act with an embedded teaser structure. And
before we go forward, can you tell me and the students, what does that mean, a teaser structure?
So basically, an act break is when the commercial comes on. So it's different for network television than it is for streaming, obviously. So the reason you've seen more act structure come about is because networks are trying to get more money for their product because production costs have been expanded. So they try and have more commercial breaks so they can sell more advertising. So that affects the structure of what you're writing, because on a 4-act structure with the teaser. So Criminal Minds, there's a scary hook that brings you into the episode, sets the stakes of what you're going to do, and then you smash to the main titles. You get to see all the heroes, and then you go to commercial break. You come back. It's Act 1, and the team is most likely on the jet flying somewhere and planning out their theory. So there's very much a structure there where you're going to have 3 beats out of, I would say, usually, if you figure a beat is about 2 pages, two and a half pages. I usually say it's about 24 to 30 beats an episode. Of that, you're going to have 3 personal beats or procedural. You're going to have that beginning moment that sets up their stakes. Oh no, I'm in a fight with my wife. A middle, maybe there's a check-in with the wife, phone call. One of the hardest parts that you run into on that middle beat is the heroes are at a life or death stakes to solve a crime. They don't really have time to be dealing with their personal baggage at that moment. So that's why you see on procedurals a lot of time there may just be a beginning beat and an end beat, because just emotionally to watch maybe bodies dropping, people dying, and our hero taking out time to deal with a relationship issue feels like, okay, are their priorities not in the right place at the right moment? So that's where then they can return from solving the case, and they've learned a lesson from the case that propels them to patch up that relationship at the end. Those are very general terms on that. So that is teaser, maybe a 3 or 4 minute exciting, scary moment with a personal beat, and then you're launching into the crime, and then you've got 4 acts, which are roughly, for a 4-act and teaser structure, you're looking at 12 minutes an act. An actual episode of TV is about 42 to 45 minutes because of commercial breaks. So I'm one of the people that actually does the mathematics, and I'll break out, like, for structure, I just do 4 beats per act, 4 times 6, 24 beats. That's going to be about 48 minutes, and then you'll have room to edit and cut. So I like doing the math of it. Some people prefer to just know that act 1 is going to be really understanding what it is that your crime is that you're trying to solve. Act 2 and 3 are going to be raising those stakes. Two is typically ending with, oh, we're really wrong about something, and 3 ending with, we're so close to solving it, and then the 4 or end of 3 would be, we've gotten to the bad guy, but now there's a new person in jeopardy, and we've got to figure out how we're going to get through this and break this down, because then act 4 is the resolution, and it's you've got to not only bring down the bad guy, maybe depending on how you've written it, you've got to find the bad guy, get to the bad guy, have the resolution, get home, and make up with your wife.
All in a day's work.
All in a day's work.
That's awesome. Oh my God. So how would that be a little bit different math-wise with a serialized show?
So serialized, so we've got 6 or 7 main characters, and you invert it almost. It's the teaser doesn't necessarily have to establish the crime. It's helpful if it does, but you're raising the personal stakes of what's happening. You can go into act 1 exploring where these characters are in their lives as just one of your heroes out of, and again, it's all variable, because on Criminal Minds it was very much, you've got 7 or 8 agents that are all flying to a single location to solve a single set of crimes. Deputy, you've got a sheriff who normally wouldn't be going to the scene of a crime unless there are bigger stakes. Now, granted, that was the premise of the show. He's not your typical sheriff, and he's more used to being a deputy, so he's going to find a way to get to those crimes.
I love his old what is that, a Blazer or a Ford, that old actual metal truck?
Absolutely. And that was but one of the challenges of those stories was that, for the real Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, it's, you you have different divisions. If there's homicide, there are homicide detectives that are going to go investigate that crime. So you could be a uniformed deputy showing up, you find out there's a murder, your job is to call in the homicide detective and not investigate that. So we very much try to play to the realism of that. And as a result, that gives you an opportunity of, okay, so if the first half of the episode is going to be deputies stumbling upon a crime that they're going to have to turn over to major crimes, then you front load it with those deputies being more in the investigatory role of the episode, while you're dealing with the personal aspect of the major crimes people that are going to come in later to deal with the crime and kind of finish it out there at the end. So every episode in Serialized, I feel like, gets to be different, and you get to play with those different dynamics. You know, was the hospital situation, it's the sheriff that's held hostage. So obviously, all hands on deck. You know, it's you're not playing those games of, well, who would really do this? We have a line in that specific episode because technically SEB, which is sheriff's department version of SWAT, they'd be the ones that are stepping in to deal that. But there's no fun having characters you don't know coming in to solve a crime. So, you know, I think there's a line that says, oh, they're on a call out in Avalon, you know, and it's, you come up with these blink and you'll miss it excuses for why the people who would actually be there on the scene are not there for that moment, because you need it to land on your characters. So that's, you know, creative license that any version of what you're going to write, you sometimes have to take to have those moments.
When you are discussing those moments in the writer's room, how do you intuit whether, can we just take a leap on this? And, or like, do we have to get in and explain, you know, how, is it just intuition that you've developed over time, or is there math?
It is heated debates. It is heated debates between Colonel Mines, we had an FBI, former FBI analyst who was our tech advisor, and on deputy we had a deputy that that was a tech advisor. And you know, with deputy, it was produced by David Ayer's company, and you know, very much it was, we're going to be as real as possible. So you know, if we've got a homicide, there was an episode where a homeless person's killed, and so we introduce a new homicide detective. You never see him again. He's just in that one episode. But that's very much because, you know, you've got a tech advisor telling you, like, hey, our guys wouldn't be investigating that. And where I say the debate part is because, you know, multiple times you would have the conversations of, okay, what, do you always follow that rule? And like, you know, if there's a foot chase, you're not going to just sit there and be like, oh, we got to wait for the homicide detectives get there. So that's why you see there are a lot of foot chases that happen. And so you have those debates of what's the realism? Yes, we understand the policy. How can we adjust that? You know, in the real sheriff's department, major crimes is not in Hall of Justice. That's one of the advantages of having, you know, the main character having been a sheriff who comes in and says he's going to do things the way a deputy would want it to be done, so that you could get a little creative license on that to say, well, this is the new sheriff changing the rules. But also, there were times where we definitely got flack about that. Like, well, it doesn't change that much. And so finding that balance becomes not just intuitive, but debates at every level of, well, what would be real and what wouldn't. With Bill running for office, you know, I remember, you know, we were going to have him have a campaign manager. And it became a discussion, well, Bill's kind of his own man. Would he have his campaign manager? And, you know, there were those discussions of, well, doesn't everyone have a campaign manager that runs for office? And, oh, but Bill wouldn't be that guy. So, you know, and so it becomes, you know, healthy debate. And I think that's the best way to describe a writer's room in general, is healthy debate. You've got you've got
And
people.
where does the hierarchy land? Like who drops the bomb or drops the gavel and makes the final decision? Is it the
Showrunner's
showrunners
job.
or
Yeah, that is that's the showrunner's job. Also the studio and network. If the network's giving you a note saying, they really want it to be this way, and that note, and maybe you're like, oh, you don't all. This is the thing they teach you. Like, you don't have to do every note, but from a network executive, what you'll see is if they really, really want you to follow that note will be repeated. And so you tend to learn that if that note keeps coming up, and I would say that that's not, you can't even say that's just an executive level. Even in writers' rooms, when you come from the thought of, if you got the note, you got the note for a reason. So why did you get that note? And exploring that. And the hierarchy ultimately absolutely ends with the showrunner um, and the network in general, because they are the ones paying your bills, and you want to make the people that are paying your bills happy. And
how many rounds of drafts go up to the network?
it's
Like per episode, I mean.
it, usually, it's even hard to say usually. It depends on where you are in the season, how much time you have before the episode starts shooting. I would say, and if it's a first year show, your experience is going to be ridiculously different than if it's a show that's been on for years, because you've got not just the network giving you notes, the studio giving you notes, the development company giving you notes. Um, Everyone's giving you notes, and um, your the optimum outcome is that you're getting less notes per draft so that you're slowly whittling in on what would be the final product. But then, I mean, you're taking deputy didn't really have, criminal lines had read throughs, and you would sit with the actors after and get the notes. Well, deputy shot in New Mexico, and the writer's office was in Los Angeles, so we didn't actually have table reads. So you would get the notes kind of emailed through. We very different experiences where on Criminal Minds, your writer was on set because it was right there. It was downstairs below your offices. And in Deputy, we had a staff writer out there who was working with the directing producer, working with the directors, and adapting it to the locations there. So it was very much depends on the production. Every production is going to be different. First year shows, you're going to go through a lot more rounds of notes than a show that's been on for multiple years. Standard, I would say, on a well-oiled machine is you're going to deliver them the studio network draft. Hopefully it's just a studio network combined draft. Sometimes first year shows will do a studio draft. You'll get notes from the studio. The studio will reread that draft before it goes on to the network. Um, so it just depends. Even in editing, I want to say we had 2 studio cuts and 2 network cuts each time. So it just depends on how many levels there are of approval. And I think that's very similar in the corporate world that you're going to run into. It's just you just learn to just keep writing, and keep adapting to the notes that you're getting.
So I was so enthralled with everything you were saying. I didn't even notice that there are these questions over here from students. So I'll take the time to ask you 1 or 2 of those. Um, in going through your credits for Criminal Minds, this is from Tari. I see writer, of course, but then there's also story editor and executive story editor. Can you collaborate a bit on the difference between those positions?
Yeah, it's basically a level of experience. As your first contract typically is going to be a 3-year deal, which is staff writer your first season, story editor your second season, executive story editor your third season. Um, what the difference between executive story editor and story editor is really just the title. You know, staff writer, but every level comes with a certain set of expectations of quality of work. And I think that that's the best way to think about it is, you know, a staff writer, no one's expecting you to win an Emmy. Like there, you are learning the craft. You are the guild actually. Staff writers even have special funding so that to encourage there to be more voices and more opportunities. That staff writers are very low cost to a production, but because of their inexperience and guild rules, I mean, come into play as well. It becomes kind of this hierarchy of experience that in a writer's room doesn't necessarily mean hierarchy of ideas. And again, that depends on the show itself and the person running the show. Ultimately, you know, you'll there are shows where everyone where his job is to sit on their hands and listen. But fortunately, I have only heard rumors of those examples and have never actually had to experience that. On everything that I've worked on, every voice was encouraged to speak and be important, be participatory. And, you know, I think that that lends then to staff writer through executive story tends to be what the industry terms low level writers. There's a certain cost analysis that comes to that, certain level experience. Mid level writers are going to be co-producer, producer to supervising producer. And then upper level can also be supervising co-EP to executive producer. And then consulting producer is typically supervising producer to co-EP level, and it's the titles are very much an experiential delineation. I don't know what word I'm trying to look for on that. But then when you become a producer, your responsibilities tend to increase. You're more expected to bring your projects within budget, have less rewrites, have more responsibilities in terms of, you know, on many shows, what they'll do is one producer might be in charge of public relations. One producer might be in charge of cast relation. It's very. I know I've heard of a model where there was one. I don't know if this was third watch. This was where there was a producer who that year they were the ones that were going to be on the notes calls besides the showrunner taking the notes, and you know, because the room might still be in session and you might be breaking your next episode while your current episode is prepping. It depends on the number of writers on your show, but that's the difference. I hope that answered it without getting it too muddled.
So yes, you're giving us such incredible information that I have a 10 bazillion questions, but how does that work out kind of like in your day to day? So you're a writer and basically a creative producer at those levels once you're past executive story editor. And then like what would you first start in the writer's room? You guys break the season, break the episodes. Everybody gets assigned whichever episode they are going to lead and write. And then is there a certain point where you kind of step back? Clearly, you're still responsibility for the writing if things need to be changed, but you're kind of almost shifting into more of a creative guidance producer type role functionally?
Yes, I would say that lower level writers, your job is to be in the room, to throw out ideas, to, you know, assist with the breaking of the stories. And then the higher up that you get in the chain, the more rewrites you're going to be responsible for. not necessarily your own scripts, but other people's as well. There's a certain point where, and no fault to any, I mean, one of the first things you learn as a writer is someone's going to rewrite you at some point. Like that's just, you cannot be precious about that. And ultimately for lower level writers, you can expect co-EP level writers roughly to be rewriting your work. And that's more because the train has to keep moving, and you're having to get a cohesive voice, maybe a different, and it's weird to say low level versus higher level, because it could be as simple as I've been in this story too long, someone else has to get past, I'll focus on someone else's story. There are Shonda Rhimes actually does a system that I've heard of, I've never worked for, but where she has, from what I've heard, divvies up. So I actually think that for the show, this is genius, because you can assign character arcs to people instead of episodes. So, okay, you're writing all of the sheriff scenes for this episode, you're writing all of the deputy scenes, you're writing all of, I mean, they're all deputies. So the doctor scenes through this, and then it would be one of your co-EPs or your showrunner then is weaving that all into a cohesive 60 page, 45, 48, depending on your show, page script that ties it all together. And then it's the showrunner's responsibility ultimately then to make sure that the tone and voice is very much what that show is. And so there's a hierarchy in there, but it's not a hierarchy. It's more who's available in whatever chaotic moments you are on that train to take over, and that you're going to, that person's going to be able to take that episode and turn it into something solid fast. I mean, there were a number of rewrites that we would have to get done in a weekend or 24 hours, and it's some of those occasions it was very much, we've got 6 writers, we've got 2 episodes, each of you take 2 acts and go, and then we'll bring it together at the end. So it's always.
How does that feel while you're working that way? Because I'm sure when you were in school, you were writing and you're getting into the head of all your characters and you're doing the whole thing, and you can savor it and lounge in it all and put it all out there. But here you're under the gun, you're worried about what your boss and everybody's going to think, but also it seems a little, or I would imagine it could feel a little like, you're driving with the flat tire when you're doing 2 scenes, somebody else is doing 2 scenes.
Absolutely. I think that it's one, worried about what, one of the first lessons you learn is don't be so worried about what people are going to think about it so much as does the scenes that you've been charged with accomplish the goal of those scenes, because everyone's always going to have a different way of doing it. I mean, if you took an entire writer's room, assigned all of them the exact same scene to write, not one of those scenes will be the same. And so I think worrying too much about that is not going to be helpful for you. And
not about control per se, but just about your own workflow and the way that you're accustomed to thinking about writing, and then all of a sudden,
it is. I am. I know I'm not alone in this. That there are, for me, Act 1 and 2 are like the, out of the 6 acts show, are the hardest 2 for me to do, because I have to get all of that right in order for, I can't jump, my head doesn't work where I can jump in and be in Act 5, know what has to be accomplished, and know where every character is. I always, even if my assignment is only to rewrite scenes in Act 5, I will start on the very first page and ramp up to Act 5 because I have to. I'm not one of, and people are different. I am so jealous of the ones that can just be like, oh, Act 5, this is what I have to do. Let me just do that. I'm not that person. I have to be like, okay, now where are all my characters? What's happening? And so as a result, I may rewrite Act 1, Act 2. Say you have a week, the good old days when you had a week to write a script. I may spend those first 3 days writing Act 1 and 2, and then next day writing the entire rest of it, because if I have many reasons for that. I mean, you're taught very early on in writing that if someone's reading your script and you don't have them caught in the first 20 pages, they're not going to finish reading the script because they've got too many things to read, too many things to do. If you can't hook them right away, they're not sticking with you. So that's why it's the same with an audience. I can tell if I'm not going to enjoy a movie 20 minutes in. I can tell if I'm not going to enjoy a TV show 20 minutes in. So those first 20 pages are so much more important than the rest. Yes, every page is important, but so yes, I'm very much a ramper upper. There was one producer that I worked with long ago who would write on notepads and would write all of his scenes out of order. He would just write the scenes that he knew he was going to need, and then he would like weave them in together at the end. More power to you. I cannot do that. I do not understand that brain, but he was a good brain.
Process is something now that I'm teaching, something that I really think about a lot, especially in film, because we're visual people. So a lot of times delivering information and watching the students go through their own process, it's fascinating for me to see what people need to do to get into their workflow, and it's different for everybody. So that's so interesting.
Absolutely, and another element of as when you become a showrunner, watching Kim be able to manage all the things that she would manage in a day, because she'd be writing and her phone is going off every 5 seconds with emails, with texts, with conference calls that they're trying to have, and then they still want the script done by tomorrow. So it's to have that capability of being able to just pause, deal with it, and then get right back into where you were, I think is so important the higher that you get, because the higher you get, the more distractions you get, and because the more responsibility and the buck lands on you.
It's more, there's a lot of managerial stuff happening and logistics and legal issues.
You lose a location the day before. How are you going to adapt to what you have? You could be up against the wall and you're shooting, and you're already shooting, so you're writing the scenes that shoot tomorrow first. But then you find out, oh, those scenes aren't shooting till Monday. It's a different set of scenes shooting tomorrow. So it's very much roll with the punches at all times, because you cannot control the chaos. All you can be is as prepared as possible for it.
And you just have to pivot. It just needs to be done, period. Like, there's no emotion, no room for emotions. Stop, pivot, take care of it, come back, or deal with the other thing. And that is the essence of a producer. And
no ego,
right
just
on top of that. Right. Yeah. I will say, you'll probably get a little laugh out of this. When I was a lawyer at 20th Century Fox, even our general counsel rewrote every email, notes, old school, with a pen. He wrote everything, rewrote everything so even inside the studio, there's rewriting and stuff going on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
She taught me to be a really good, at least legal writer. So it was great.
I mean, because my, I'd been at Sony working in their marketing department, and that was an international marketing division of Sony because they were selling their shows overseas. So, it was a very different, you would want to be creative and cute with the way that you were telling something. Well, that's not going to translate in China or in South America or so you constantly get rewritten. And I think that was a lesson that I took into television is you're writing for someone, not necessarily the audience. In television, you're writing for the studio and for the network because they are your marketing director who's giving your notes. It's you. And if you can find the fun in maintaining your story, addressing the notes, and that becomes your challenge, then I think that you can do really well because I think that it's the people who are like, well, no, I want it my way, who get reputations for being difficult so much as, well, I got this note for a reason. How can I make this fit what I'm trying to do and address what they need me to do?
Well, and it's a teachable moment. Thank you, Barack Obama, for formulating that phrase that we can now use and everybody understands what it means. But it took me years of working in the studio to realize, oh, the bosses that, kind of are crunching down on me and reforming me are giving me a true gift of learning and making me better. And I'm grateful for it.
I am a amalgam of every boss I have had to this day. So, it's you take a lesson from everyone.
Okay, let me actually, students. Hello, students. You guys I see from Kubab and Leah. Do you guys want to ask your questions yourselves with faces and voices? Hello. Rick, I think I see your dad.
My dad is definitely in here. I have been warned.
Okay. Camera doesn't work, Tari says.
Hello, is this working?
Oh, yep,
Hi, Professor Thrasher. Yeah, my camera doesn't work, but my mic does.
that's fine.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, so let's say hypothetically you have an idea for either a season or a series, and you have like bits and pieces, like a beginning, parts of a middle, and an end. What would you do to connect these pieces together? Like any kind of like filler or any new story elements or anything to like connect these pieces together? What would you do?
Sure. I, the major question is, first of all, I think it's a great question. With Deputy, the way Kim even pitched the arc of the season was very much in a 3-act structure of this is where our characters are going to be in the beginning, this is where they're going to be in the middle, and this is where they're going to be at the end. And I think that if you think of everything that way, I mean, it's the questions you have to ask yourself are, if I know at the beginning someone who doesn't want to be sheriff is going to be sheriff, and then at the end he's going to want to be sheriff and fight to continue to be sheriff, then the next question to help fill in my middle is, what do I need to see a character go through and experience to get from I don't want to do this job, but somehow I'm in this job, to I really want to do this job no matter how it lands on my family and no matter how this isn't the world that I prefer. So then you start dropping in the elements of, all right, well, if you are going to play to there's a toll on the family, how are you going to show that? You know, and I think that if you go back and watch Deputy, you'll see that we start with a moment with we have a moment with the daughter where, you know, the daughter skips school and paparazzi catch her doing that. And it's, you know, as a deputy, you don't have paparazzi following you around. But as the sheriff of Los Angeles County, um, you do. And you know, it's so you know that you're going to be able to explore that moment and that can form your personal arc of that episode. And then you talk about, okay, well, what's another negative aspect of being, you know, the sheriff? Well, you can become a target, or your loved ones can become a target. And that's then where we explore the idea of Paula being held hostage, not necessarily because, which I love the moment, because it's, you know, this debate of, well, she's also the number one surgeon, so that's why they needed her, but also she's the sheriff's wife, so that's how they're going to get away. And you start planting those, and each one of those beats becomes kind of the germ of what an episode is going to be, so that at the end you have seen, it's all math. You've seen what are the additives that add up to, no, he wants to have this job. So you show the toll of maybe why he might not want to stay in the job. But then you have to show the victories, and you have to show that he's making a difference. You know, you have Joseph, his godson, growing into a fine deputy. You have you get to see his successes and realize that if he had just been a deputy, they wouldn't. One of the great things that we addressed kind of towards the end of the season is he couldn't, if he had not been sheriff, they would not have been able to solve these crimes. And if he had not gone through the experiences that he did to get there, he would not have panned out successfully. And that informs them, because you can't just show the conflict and the negative parts of it. You have to show the positive parts so that you buy, okay, the good that he is doing outweighs the bad that he has had to ordeal to get there. And that informs what the middle is going to be, because you have to show that journey and that arc of going from not wanting something to wanting it no matter the cost. And I think that if you just ask yourself the questions of, okay, I have this season arc or I have this series arc, the best way to think of that is, this is where I want to start them. This is where I want them to be at the end. How do I get there? And what are both the positives and the negatives of that journey that you can then highlight, because that's going to be what informs the change. And, you know, every story arc, it's all about how does that character change based on what they've faced.
Yes, and I want to highlight Aaliyah. Yes, I can't figure out how to respond just to you. I'm so sorry. Too much going on. And also Kenji that have questions.
Hi, yeah, so this is Aaliyah. It's okay, Professor. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Just hi to your dad. Thank you for so much for being here. My question would be, how do you navigate group spaces when working on a character or episode where you have strong ideas? And then where do you compromise, and what do you do with the ideas that are or are not used? And then how do you combat writer's block?
The ideas that you don't use, I'll start with that. You hold on to, because you never know when you're going to want to use them. We were constantly thinking of stories that we want to tell. What is the right time yet? And that becomes a balance of not making the story seem repetitive. Whether it's personal story or it's crime story, you don't want week there's a robber, and that's just boring. And you don't want everyone's relationship struggles to be the same. You don't want every single one of them is dealing with a non-supportive spouse, or every one of them's dealing with a very supportive spouse, because you need it to feel different. And even if you want to explore a relationship breakup, if one of your characters has just had a relationship breakup, you're not going to want to break the other relationship up until maybe the next season, or open with a relationship breakup, end with a season with a relationship breakup, because you just have to put everyone in different places. And that's not just for storytelling. When you think about the total production, your actors aren't going to want to be playing the same arcs that their fellow actors are doing. Everyone wants and should have their own journey, and that becomes very much a balancing act. On a show like Criminal Minds, it was when you're thinking about the different kinds of crimes that you can have, we would literally keep a chart of what are the crimes that we've dealt with this season. Or even for the first few years of Criminal Minds, it was even, oh well, we did that season 1, or and in season 3, okay, that was a valid argument. By season 9 or 10, it's like, well, I think we've earned the chance to tell another serial murder. Yeah, well, I mean, all of them were serial murders basically, but it's it's a discussion. And I know we had so many stories that we just didn't get to, flat out. Like, we already knew where some of our characters are going to be at the end of season 2, halfway into season 1, just because we knew for it to naturally happen, you couldn't tell that story yet, and you needed to learn and grow with that character. So you just kind of punt that storyline down the road until it naturally comes up. Or I think that's the main answer. As far as managing opinions and different thoughts and opinions, again, that ultimately comes down to the showrunner and their vision and what do they want. On Criminal Minds, because I mean, it still boils down to the showrunner, to the producers, and and again, the network too. I mean, there were some stories that we would want to tell where crafted a story that's involves a certain crime that the network may come back and be like, this is a little dark, can we not do this? Or or hey, we really have like great, at every level. There was one story that we crafted, hey, we've got really great footage of a certain city in Los Angeles, can we base an episode around that? And what was funny about that in particular experience is that we did that, and the episode ended up not even taking place in that city. So there's so many rolling elements that I think you always defer to the showrunner. You always learn kind of naturally in the process of when you may really want it to be one way, but it's just not going to be that way, and you just accept that and you move forward, because you have to. It is a constant train that is running, and we don't have time to really stop and be upset. And to understand that, like, to understand a writer's room, so many ideas are getting thrown out, that I think that you learn very quickly that you may have a really cool idea and you may think, oh my God, this is the best idea. They're just not seeing my brilliance. And, you know, really it's that idea is not perfect for the moment and you just move on with other ideas. I mean, that's really your job in the writer's room. Whoever's assigned to a certain arc or to a certain episode, they're going to be the ones that decide which of those ideas they like and which they use. And it's not anything, it's no commentary on people whose ideas are not used, other than that's not the one that landed for the person who's responsible for writing the work. And you just learn that as you go. It's a lot of back and forth and conversations. And you know, I used to still, I mean, you'll get some notes where you'll think, oh, I don't really like that idea. But you'll take the time to actually see if it works, because maybe you super like have learned their ideas usually pan out. And so you'll try it and then you'll prove yourself wrong and be like, oh, hey, they were right. This is really awesome. And I'm glad that I took the time to figure out how that would work. And you learn to deal with that through experience.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Kenji here. So my question is, so you spend a lot of time really developing these characters and giving them growth in a lot of things. How do you, as a writer, deal with a actor who ends up leaving the show, and you put so much work into it, and so many of the audience members have grown so attached to them that once they leave, you have to change your script and make all these changes? How do you go about that and making sure that you keep the audience that you had invested into the show?
You learn to, it's going to depend on it's and the circumstances for the actor's exit. And I think that it's important that you give, I mean, if it's someone who's been with the show for a long time, you want to really emotionally land their departure, and so that the fans do keep coming back. And I think that Criminal Minds was learning ground on that, and it was a pretty good learning ground, because we went through many phases on that show. And I think that you honor who that character is and the growth, and it was always very much about what would be a natural reason for them to leave. I think that depending, I know that there are some shows that every find out that an actor wants to leave the show, they immediately start planning, oh, how are we going to kill that character? How are we going to, make it as sensational as possible? And, that might be the format of that show. And, I think that Criminal Minds was very much, Criminal Minds is very much like, we want to know, and that came from the showrunner, very much want to know that, that our hero is still out there in the world making their impact, even if they have left the show. And I think that just is interchangeable depending on the show. I mean, 24, you guys might not remember 24, but I mean, you couldn't get into liking any character on that show. I mean, really, the only one that you knew that was going to stick around was the main character, because everyone else died at some point. And that became a part of that show. Was oh no, like it had the shock factor of you never really knew when a main character was going to be written out suddenly, and then it had the shock. Say that again.
Like The Sopranos, somebody's going to get whacked.
Absolutely. So it's just different per show, because I was a huge Buffy fan, and I mean, thank God the core four made it all the way to the end, because I would have been destroyed as a fan had something happened. And for any of those of you that know the show, at the end of season 5, I was destroyed. And you know, it's so it's managing the expectations, not just of your fan, less so about your fans and more so of the show that you've set up, but definitely paying service to your fans. I mean, if they have invested years and years and years into a character, you want to do right by that character and by the fans so that they get the experience and the arc and the catharsis that they need to say goodbye to that character.
That's Kenji, that was such a great question. Thank you. And I have kind of a piggyback question onto that. Aside from the way that you would write and treat the character as they're departing and giving the fans the mourning process that they need, what about, I know I've experienced, and I'm sure everybody has, you have a show, you watch it, you love it, and then your favorite character is leaving and you don't care about the show at all anymore. We've all had that experience where some big change for a business or practical purpose happens, and then we just don't really, we don't have the same verve to go back to it. What types of discussions do you have about how do we still feed that emotional aspect that character is bringing to the overall story? How do we still give them, if that character is like our pizza character or our hot dog character, how do we keep giving our audience that are tuning in for hot dog and pizza, how do we keep giving that?
This is one major supporter of ensemble shows. Criminal Minds, Mandy Patinkin was, you know, it was considered very much the first 2 years of that show. It was very much considered, despite there being a cast of 7, that was the Mandy Patinkin show. So when he left at the end of season, technically at the beginning of season 3, people terrified that, you know, fans would not stick around and would not you know, let the other characters into their hearts and let the show continue. And you know, that was our fear, and the show went for years. So it's you know, I think that a show like 24, which we were talking about before, where Jack Bauer is the character, you can't kill Jack Bauer and continue the show. A show like Criminal Minds, because there are other characters to connect to, and that you become invested in, you could see characters go. You know, I mean, I'm not giving enough credit to Joe Mantegna coming in to replace Mandy Patinkin, and he just being the tremendous entity that he is. But also, you know, if it were not for having that strong supporting cast, I don't think that the show would have continued. But we had such a diverse range of characters. There are people who related to Garcia, people who related to Reed, people who related to Morgan, that losing one person allowed you to rally around the remaining characters. And I think that, you know, for those of you that weren't familiar with it at the time, it was very public in how Mandy left the show. You know, he was very outspoken about the material was too dark for him. And so I think that that helped us with the transition as well, because it wasn't that that he was let go, and it wasn't that he didn't get along with people. I mean, it was very much, you know, a personal decision on his part that the show then found a way to adapt to. And I think that that's a very different experience than you know, fans get very invested in their product, that they, especially ones that go on for years and years and years. And They want to know that their characters and their actors that are very much the face of the show and beloved, are treated well and properly. And so I think that in going through that experience, what you learned, we brought in Ed Bernero, who was the showrunner at the time, was very much, we're not replacing Gideon, Mandy's character. And we had set up for those first 2 years of Gideon being a bird lover. And the very first scene that you have with David Rossi, Joe Montaigne coming in to replace him, he's hunting birds. And and it's I think that you run the mistake of trying to replace the characters so much as yes, story-wise or character-wise, you may need another character to come in to fill that void structurally or hierarchically in the BAU, but you don't replace the characters themselves. And I think that that's an important because loss of people in our lives is a reality, and loss of characters is just as a reality. And so you can't just replace them. You have to bring in entirely different aspects that people can rally around and understand why that part of the show is not there anymore.
That's really interesting, and it's also fascinating because I didn't watch Criminal Minds back then when that type of transition was happening with Mandy, but it would have been, and forgive me if this is actually what happened, but it would have been a fun play if Mandy was leaving on, this is a little bit too gritty, a little too upsetting or too dark kind of a concept, and then going to the CIA, which of course is more about the prevention.
Yeah, I was like, Homeland is not a happy story. So I think that people
focus on prevention, not on like, oh my God, this happened, let's unravel it.
Yeah, and I think that there's almost a detachment that you can have to terrorism versus these human beings doing these it's when you get into the world of serial killers and understand the especially a show like that dealt so much with the psychology of the why these people got to the point that they did to do what they did. It's disturbing. I mean, it was a lot. There were heavy days where FBI agents would come in and tell us about cases that they had dealt with. And Gene Triplehorn's very first moment on that show was walking into a writer's room while we were being presented a case about someone disposing of younger victims in not pleasant means. And I mean, that was a day where like I went for a walk after because you just gotta. So I get that, and I think it was ironic that he ended up on Homeland for so long after doing that.
Hearing your reason why he wanted to leave, just like, okay, you're like going from after the disaster to trying to prevent the disaster.
Yeah.
The real life thing could have worked. Great.
It makes total sense. It makes total sense.
All right, who else has a question? Speak up.
Question. My name's Tiffany, and I was wondering how your work in writing about crime victims and people in the LGBTQ community inspired you to make a nonprofit.
Okay. I don't know if the nonprofit came from seeing so much money in programming and content, and there's not enough that came from a strategic standpoint of, is there a way to take advertising dollars and make them work for nonprofits? Like that was really where that aspect came from, because it from it came from many things. The first showrunner I ever had was my TV writing professor at Columbia College, where I met Professor Amanda, and and for me, it was very much like, not everyone is going to move to Los Angeles and do this. So for me, I feel like, television is one of the few industries where, like, you are required to basically be in Los Angeles. Like, even if your show shoots somewhere else, like, for a writing aspect, it's, you have to be here. And anyone who knows me knows I've never quite let go of Indiana, and that's where my everything is. And it's been very much, for me, it was, I think there are a lot of voices of people who aren't necessarily going to make that journey to come to Los Angeles because they want to be home and close to family, and or financial circumstances prevent that. And so the nonprofit very, very much came from this idea of, I have been so, like, blessed, lucky to have gotten to have this journey of a career. And really, it came from my teachers and my professors, and they're the ones that started that journey for me. And it was, came from the idea of, well, I can't teach, like, I mean, I've taught a couple classes, but you can't, when you're working in television, you cannot do both in a way. And so it very much came to the aspect of, well, how can I share what I've learned with other people that aren't necessarily capable of coming to Los Angeles, working in television. And then adding on to that, everything so much nowadays, people need content. They need content, because everyone has content now. And there's a lot of money behind that, why can't, in this industry, there are like these certain entertainment lawyer will know. There are profit percentage points of a show and the money that it makes through international sales, international advertising, and you would see kind of the money that that was involved in that, and you think, well, if even just 1 percentage point of one formulaic profit on a show was applied to the nonprofit industry, how much good and how much change that 1% could affect. And that's really where the business model for the nonprofit, that, since we're talking about it, I have to give a shout out to Top Dog at University of Indianapolis, because I would not be able to say that it launches October 23rd without them. And it's just, I think that nonprofits need help. And if there's any way to help them with the skills that you learn, whether you're a writer, a producer, actor, anything, those are the people that need creative application of your skill set, and how that can benefit people whose voices don't get heard, and people who don't have the opportunities that others might have. And so any way that we can do to give back, Ed Bernero was running a show called Third Watch at the time that he taught my TV drama writing class. He did not have to teach my TV drama writing class. And if he had not done that, I do not have a guarantee that I would be where I am today. And so I think that anytime that you become successful, you need to figure out a way to trickle that back. And that's where that came from. The second part of your question was uh, LGBT representation. I mean, I fortunately, being a fan of Buffy, had LGBT representation very early. But I think that that is something that has not always been there. And one of the proudest aspects of working on Deputy was being able to write the first primetime non-binary character. And you know, you you get into this, you get philosophical debates with more conservative audiences who don't necessarily support showing that diversity aspect of character. And if anything, that makes me feel that it's more important to do so, because um, you know, it's, you don't think about it. I mean, I'm 41 now, and I think about the shows that growing up in the Midwest, Indiana, that I watched, and I think about the characters that I connected to at such a young age, with the exception being Star Trek, because Gene Roddenberry was was very forward thinking on representation. But almost every show that I grew up with was straight, white, man, women. That's all you saw. And I think that, you know, um, nowadays it's such a just beautiful, necessary thing to see everyone represented, because you don't know that you're not being like only the people that aren't being represented really recognize that they're not being represented. Because if you have grown up always seeing yourself on television, you don't recognize you haven't recognized that the others, whether it's sexual orientation, race, any religion, haven't been being represented, because you've been part of the system that has just been reinforcing your own beliefs or your own appearance. And so it is vitally important that every voice and every different aspect of humanity be portrayed in content, because someone is out there who is not seeing themselves when they watch this product, and when they watch your show, or when they watch your uh, anything, and they deserve to see themselves just like anyone else.
I'll even piggyback on that, if I may, that um, lack of representation is, for sure, 100% agree with you, big problem. But in addition to that, when representation does happen, like women in movies in the 70s and 80s, like are those really modeling the way that I should be interacting in life? No. And they set us up and they teach us really bad behavior, not only behavior towards others, but how we treat ourselves. And I almost think that's, I don't know if it's more detrimental. I don't even know if I should make a comparison, but it's very damaging. And of course, communities of color, marginalized into, downtrodden, bad people, criminals. I mean, that is terrible mentoring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a lot of that product came from ignorance of yeah, I mean, the fact that those early 70s shows were telling women that they were supposed to be in the kitchen. It's uh, you know it, um I think that's, you have to be very, you can't just say I'm going to have a woman. I think that it's beneficial. One of the things that I learned from Ed Bernero was that you cast a writer's room, and he very much made sure that every aspect, like he tried to put as many different aspects of life into the writer's room as possible so that those different aspects were then portrayed on screen. And I think that it all boils down to the idea. And it dumbfounds me that to this day you will still hear, now studios are doing so much better about this, but it dumbfounds me to this day that you will still hear about writing staffs that are 95% even white males. And it's it starts with the idea and the diversification of ideas, the diversification of the people that are writing that, because that's the only way that you're going to have the non-stereotypical arcs and characters that you need to be genuine about it. I mean, it all starts with behind the scenes before it even gets to the front of the scenes. That's my fundamental belief, and that was something that I was fortunate to be taught from the very beginning. But that you hear, other people do not have that experience, and I think that that's important for every person. Anyone that gets into a position where they are creating a writer's room for a project needs to think of that immediately, and needs to think of that in the casting aspect as well. You have to cast your writer's room, you have to cast your cast in as diverse a way as possible, because all voices need to be included in order to get the genuine experience. I mean, yes, you can imagine what something would be like, but you're not getting the real experience if you don't have the real voices behind them.
Voices, and even, if I, take it down and dig a little deeper in there, things like the Honeymooners, for example, way before my time, but one of these days, I don't remember the wife's name, Pal, right in the kisser. He's telling his wife every episode,
Yeah,
one of these
domestic
days,
abuse was funny.
speak
Yeah.
up, I'm going to punch you in the mouth. And how many Americans watch that show? But how many girls grew up thinking, I better keep my mouth shut? And how many women have we seen, TV and film? I mean, this is a whole other discussion, but I'm just throwing it out there, and then we can move on. How many women have we seen in movies and TV? Even recently, the season 3 premiere episode of Killing Eve. Villanelle slaps Eve in the face because Eve is upset. Women's emotions are terrible. Like, you got to slap it out of them. And it's, just these slight, small actions that we've come to kind of think of as classically dramatic, that, maybe almost instinctually we put into stories and films and television. But if we really kind of step back and look, like, what is that telling young girls? Like, if you get emotional or you're upset that you just saw her kill somebody, you're going to get slapped. Now, I have to say, I love Killing Eve. I'm not trying to slam the show. It's genius. But I just thought, wow, just simple actions like that, not even, the whole overall story arc of a female character.
Oh,
Doesn't treat us how to doesn't teach us how to treat ourselves even.
right. And I think that you're seeing, I don't think she comes fast enough, but I think that you are seeing people learn from that. I mean, there's even drug abuse can become such a. I'm thinking there's an organization called the Entertainment Industries Council that deals with mental health and the portrayal of mental health in programming. And the studios, I really have to give credit to them that they have taken active steps to make sure. I've gone to at least every show that I've been on. I have gone to a seminar by the Entertainment Industries Council where this last one was actually at Fox with the Surgeon General, and where this is again where nonprofit comes in to play as well, because it's they talk about the responsibility of how to portray that. And you know, it's you can do the stereotypical drug abuse or mental illness, but if you're using the wrong terminology, I mean, this is where GLAAD was so beneficial in helping us with the non-binary story. You know, not only was it Bex being very involved in that storytelling, but GLAAD as well, because just even terminology and phrasing that you would think is innocuous. You know, we would get notes back on telling us, well, actually, like if people, you know, think this way, it's harmful for people that are actually going through this journey. You know, even wordings like into the argument between Bex and Genevieve, if I'm remembering correctly, you know, there were. I want to say that in an earlier version, we had a commentary about like, so, you know, don't I deserve to know who you really are? And that minimizes the experience of the individual who's trying to identify who they are in the first place. And you know, it takes the ownership of identity of that person away from them, because now you're making it about the person who's hurt, that they didn't know the truth behind the closeted individual, and you can't minimize that experience. And you know, being written by, you know, Kim and I, both LGBT, you know, it was, but even that, you've got this rainbow of people, and it's even our experiences did not match up to, you know, this experience, because everyone's different and everyone has such a different perspective and journey and story behind that, that it was really illuminating working with GLAAD to hear just even common terminology such as, well, I deserve to know. No, you don't deserve anything, because it's not about you, and it's about their journey and where they are in their self-identification. And really, if everyone just takes that step back and realizes it's not about you, it's about them and their identity, and they have the right to their identity, and to however many steps it takes for them to admit that identity, whether they choose to or not. It's not about you. And that's you know, just simple wording becomes so important um, to have those consultants, and the same with entertainment industry councils and the work that they do, that you know, I think it just becomes a responsibility of producers, of writers, of anyone making content, to just make sure you're doing it in a responsible manner.
Agreed. All right, who else has a question?
This is Deborah. Came in a little late. Thanks, Rick. I'm enjoying everything that you're saying, and a couple of other questions, but I wanted to kind of tap on what you were saying, you know, being responsible to reflect the writing in your showing, your series, how the real world looks. I know that I'm older than most of you guys, and I remember Leave It to Beaver. I don't know whether any of you guys remember that. And I remember June Cleaver, she would have the pearls and in the kitchen, and, you know, just in the kitchen doing the so-called womanly duties. And I just always knew as a little girl something wrong with that. And then I didn't see really any blacks on there. So that didn't reflect my world. That didn't reflect the real world. So I think it's very important, like you guys are saying, for the series, TV shows, movies, or whatever, to reflect the real world. I want to say, move on. When I was in Iraq, I'm a retired veteran, 24. We had something called the commissary and PX, where we would go get tapes and things like that. And 24 was my series. I mean, I stayed on it. It kept my sanity being over, you know, in Iraq. And the other thing I want to ask you quickly, what inspires your writing? I mean, what keeps it fresh? What inspires you as a writer?
First, yes, 24 was literally my gravy. Like that was uh Jack Bauer was just everything. But I my in terms of inspiring the writing, it's the world that you're in, and it's the challenges of what you get to portray. You know, I think there's a lot of research. You know, when I first came on to Deputy, you know, they were um 3 episodes in. They'd gotten rid of their first showrunner. It was already shooting. It had an impossible air date coming up, and you know the inspiration was very much like, here's an amazing challenge. Here are incredibly different characters that we get to explore. And I think for me, and this comes from, you know, the shows that made me want to even become a TV writer were shows that had such like character development, like the Buffy, like the Aliases, like you know, maybe some characters didn't stick around in 24 long enough to get the character development, but certainly, you know, Jack Bauer evolved over those years. And it's for me, the inspiration comes from being from those characters' journeys, and um, how I always enter it with this like idea of like integrity, honesty, inspire change. Like those, that's like my mantra, and it's like you want to be real to real life. You want to be honest about what are the challenges, what are the stumbles, what are the ways to overcome those stumbles, and how can you inspire change, whether it's change of thought, change of perception, change of just positive change. You know, whether it's just people not understanding each other and hating each other versus, you know, just putting some humanity on it. I mean, the hostage situation that we did this season on Deputy, you could understand that these weren't just, you know, the it wasn't just a criminal in need of surgery. It was a human being behind the crime who needed help. And you know, so much I think that when people stumble, they are written off or they're marginalized. And you know, being able to show humanity behind that, I think is will always inspire me, because it's you can't, you need to start thinking of people in the layers and realizing, you know, that just because you think one way, not everyone thinks that way, and that doesn't mean that the way that you think is necessarily the way everyone should think. And it's, I don't know, for me that's where my inspiration comes from, just telling like the fun and challenging stories that make people think about things a little differently. Or I, you know, I say that, and then I also like will just enjoy writing a story that's fun. And you know, my you know, Doctor Who is like the greatest show ever in history of, you know, mankind, and person kind, I should say. And you know, that was just, you know, that's a show about adventure. And you know, and nowadays, like, it's, you know, I mean, we have a female doctor, and like if there's anything that speaks to gender spectrum, it's having a Time Lord who can, you know, change their sex or their race, or you know, and it just, but it's still the same person. And I think that's such a cool cool message and way to do that, and a way to evolve product that was developed. I mean, that's a show from the 60s when it was, you know, this man alien going around with the cute new female traveling with him every week, and that has evolved into this female Time Lord able to change her sex, able to change her race, and that gets to tell stories from Rosa Parks to Tesla, and it's the evolution of what you get to see and do and the challenges, and that's what inspires me every day, every part of everything that I write.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thanks, Deborah. I think we're kind of getting, I think we're maybe over the time we're supposed to, so we probably need to wrap it up because we're going to be bumping into somebody else's session. Is there any last minute question that's burning through that must be asked?
Desires, anyone?
What was the favorite episode of, hang on.
On Criminal Minds. Oh, do I have to choose between Coda or Exit Wounds, or any of them too? Coda has a special place in my heart because that was telling the story of autistic boy, and I I got to do a lot of research. I mean, I did a lot of research on that one. Honestly, if I'm being truly honest, my favorite one that I ever did was 200. And for those of you who are Criminal Minds fans, I know, Conflicted was they're all, I love all of them because there are stories behind all of them. My favorite part of doing 200, though, was that for those that don't know, there was a period in the show in which two of the female main characters were let go. And this was not a story, this was not a decision by the writers and producers. It was a decision that was made way above our heads. And it should have never happened. And what is awesome in my head, eventually we got them all back. But what for me, the greatest part of 200 was that the two who saved the day in that episode are absolutely the two that were let go. And for me, that was like everything about what I wanted to accomplish. It was because they were just two of the most tremendous actors that I have ever encountered in my life. And what had happened was just not right. And they, even though one of them wasn't even a main cast member when we did it, but we knew we were going to get her back as a guest cast. And there had been a little bit of debate of like, well, she's not a regular right now. Like, can we really give her so much of that victory? And absolutely, so I think that because of the drama behind the scenes, that very much, in fitting the theme of this entire talk of being a producer, and you have to roll with some punches that you just did not ever see coming. And for me, that episode in particular will always be my favorite, because not only did we, did we have women back that were, not only did we have them back, but we had them back in such a way that I think it was very evident that the decision that had been made by, fortunately, someone that no longer works at that studio had made a very poor and wrong and awful decision. And that getting to see those two women kicking ass on the rooftop, and that will always be my favorite episode.
Is that a CBS show?
It was a CBS show. Yes, it was. I love it. A wonderful. But that was one circumstance, and we got past it, and yeah. So there you go. You're welcome, Terry.
All right, so I'm just gonna throw out a quickie, and then I think we probably have to go. If out of all the shows that have ever existed in the world, you could be a writer on, what would you choose?
Not a question. Doctor Who. First of all, if it's a show that's still in the air, it would be Doctor Who. If Buffy were back, there would be and my agent was on the phone saying I'd been offered a job on both. I don't know what I would do. I would probably have an aneurysm trying to make that decision. But absolutely,
I would have guessed that you would have said Buffy.
I would
I was
be.
like, wait a minute, what?
But if Doctor Who called, I'm just saying, Chris Chibnall, if you watch this, I would be on an airplane I would be booking the ticket as I'm driving to the airport. Just saying. Same with you, Joss Whedon, Buffy.
So many friends who are die-hard, obsessed Buffy fans.
Absolutely.
I've actually never watched the show. I know.
It's absolutely the greatest mistake that you must.
We're up on that. Film school 101.
Oh my God. Buffy was everything. Oh, it was, not greatest show ever. Because it had shocks, it had just the most flushed out, awesome characters, and she kicked. I mean, she was, Buffy just. She died. I'm not giving it away.
Angel too. So when
Angel was great. Angel's the first. When I was a PA, I drove a golf cart around. I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I drove a golf cart around, and Angel was shooting on the Paramount lot at the time, and I totally broke into this is when their main set was the hotel, the Hyperion, and I totally broke onto the set, and I stole one of the Angel Investigations business cards because Joss Whedon, that was just such an amazing universe.
You got the card frame now?
No, it's in like this little plastic, yes. I mean, yeah, it's not framed, but it's in a little plastic so that it will last forever.
Oh, that's good. I see both your parents there now. Hello.
Hi, Dad.
They must be very happy to see you and hear all of your amazing stories and information. Amanda, do you have any last?
I just want to say thank you, Rick, so much for taking your time to come and talk to our students. We so very much appreciate it. So, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely. All right, all my students, let's say a big thank you.
Woo-woo.
Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Bye.
Everyone stay safe. Wear your mask.
Yeah.
Bye.